You're listening to the Fan to Fan podcast, and today we're talking about 1983's animated adventure fantasy cult classic, Fire and Ice. Welcome to the Fan to Fan podcast. This is your host, Bernie Gonzalez, and today we're going to be talking about 1983's animated adventure fantasy cult classic, Fire and Ice.
From a time when the world was new and everything was possible. From the film creator of Wizards and Lord of the Rings comes fantasy and adventure, action, suspense.
The movie was released on August 26 of 1983, and it was directed by Ralph Bakshi. And to talk about Fire and Ice, I really have to start by talking about Ralph Bakshi. So his first job was at a cartoon studio called Terrytoons, and they produced a number of different legendary animated classics such as Heckle and Jekyll and Mighty Mouse.
Here I come to save the day. That means that Mighty Mouse is on the way.
He worked at a low-level position that required him to carefully remove dirt and dust from animation cells, and then eventually he was promoted to a cell painter, then he did layouts, then he was an actual animator, and finally he became a director. His first directorial chore was 1972's Fritz the Cat.
Hey, you old scroungy old alley cat, get out of them garbage cans.
You talking to me, Jack?
What the hell are you doing there anyway?
Hey, man, here we are on the brink of the apocalypse, the eve of destruction, so to speak, and I can't think of anything to do.
Far out.
It was a major hit at the time and became the most successful independent animated feature of all time and proved that adult-oriented animation could actually be financially successful. And although Bakshi was then labeled a pornographic cartoonist, especially since Fritz the Cat was rated X, it was the first animated film to actually receive the X rating for its racism, violence, swearing, drug use, and sex, the things that usually get you an X rating. But they used it for marketing and actually had the tagline, "He's X-rated and animated." Pretty good marketing department there.
This picture has been rated X.
In 73, Bakshi went on to direct Heavy Traffic. In 75, he directed Coonskin, both animated features. And then in 76, he directed the PG-rated Wizards.
20th Century Fox presents Wizards, a futuristic fantasy epic born in the mind of Ralph Bakshi, the master of animated magic. It is the story of two brothers, Avatar and Black Wolf, powerful wizards, and mortal enemies from the day they were born. Wizards, the ultimate futuristic fantasy epic.
So the initial title for Wizards was actually War Wizards, and as War Wizards production costs began to increase, Alan Ladd Jr., who was the Fox president at the time, declined to put more money into the production. Ladd had been dealing with budgetary concerns on a small film being directed by George Lucas called Star Wars. You may have heard of it. Bakshi and Lucas had negotiated contracts that entitled them to franchise ownership, merchandising, and back-end payment. Turned out pretty well for Mr. Lucas. So Alan Ladd Jr. decided to extend that same offer to Bakshi and suggested that he also fund the completion of his film himself. Bakshi chose rotoscoping. It was a cost-effective way to complete the movie's battle scenes with his own finances.
The amazing thing about this animated feature is that it was photographed as a live-action feature first, a technique called rotoscope. This process achieved a heightened reality of movement and action in the animation.
Rotoscoping is an animation technique in which animators trace over footage frame by frame. So the end product is really fluid animation that feels more realistic than standard animation.
This 4-second scene, which is 7 feet of screen footage, may take the better part of a week to do.
So after the completion of Wizards, Bakshi moves on to 1978's PG-rated Lord of the Rings.
The Shire lives. Frodo lives.
Must save the precious.
Gollum lives. Gandalf lives.
The ring back.
Mordor lives. In a motion picture fantasy beyond imagination, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings.
Director John Boorman, who'd worked on Point Blank, Deliverance, Sardos, and Excalibur, was actually originally contracted to direct an adaptation of Lord of the Rings, where all 3 of the volumes, so Fellowship of the Rings, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King, were going to be condensed into one movie. But Bakshi met with United Artists, who were going to make the movie, and agreed to let Bakshi direct. But instead of just one movie, they agreed to 2. Bakshi originally planned to shoot the whole film in live action and then rotoscope the footage, just like he'd done on Wizards. He even used some limited, very stylized live action within the animated scenes. Well, United Artists didn't think audiences would pay to see an incomplete movie, so they didn't mention that it was part 1 of 2 in their marketing. And then the studio refused to fund the sequel, so that never materialized. It cost $4 million to produce, and it did gross over $30 million. So my first experience with Bakshi was Lord of the Rings. I saw it on WGN Family Classics. It was a show hosted by Roy Leonard on Saturday afternoons, and that very much sparked my interest to read all of the books in junior high. And if you've never seen it, you should absolutely take some time to check out Bakchi's Lord of the Rings. It's amazing. Great visual style, great animation. So after Lord of the Rings, Bakshi moves on to direct 1981's American Pop. American Pop does well enough for 20th Century Fox, and they actually agree to distribute Bakchi's next film, which is titled Fire and Ice.
In an age of myth and legend, the world trembles before the power of Necron, master of evil, ruler of ice. Against him stand Tigra, Princess of Firekeep, and captive of the ice demons, Larn, last of a mighty warrior tribe, and her only hope of escape. And Darkwolf, mysterious avenger, and sworn enemy of the Ice Tyrant. Their courage will be tested. The challenge must be met. The final battle between the armies of the cold and the keepers of the flame is about to begin. Fire and Ice, from the visual imagination of Ralph Bakshi and the dazzling artistry of Frank Frazetta. A fantasy adventure from 20th Century Fox.
So Bakshi returns to fantasy, and he had really good timing because Beastmaster was just directed by Don Coscarelli, and that stars Mark Singer, and Conan the Barbarian, which was directed by John Milius and stars Arnold Schwarzenegger. Those movies were incredibly popular. And not just these two, the popularity of the whole sword and sandal barbarian medieval fantasy movie in the 80s was really hard to miss. You had movies like Hawk the Slayer in 1980, Dragon Slayer in 81, same year as Excalibur, also Clash of the Titans, The Sword and the Sorcerer in 82, along with Beastmaster, Conan, and Dark Crystal. Deathstalker in 83, Krull, love Krull, that was in 83 as well. You're the Hunter of the Future. Conan had a sequel, Conan the Destroyer in 84, along with 80 Hawk in 85, Legend, Black Cauldron, also in 85, Adventures of Hercules, Red Sonja, 85, Masters of the Universe, that came out in 87. Year after that was Willow in 88. So I think you get the point. Ton of different movies that were released with the sword and sandal theme. Well, Bakshi wanted to work with his friend Frank Frazetta, who, if you've never heard of, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, was very much a staple of sword and sandal imagery.
The art of Frank Frazetta, the renowned fantasy illustrator, is original and unprecedented in laying the groundwork for the visual aesthetics of fantasy art today. Another artist, director Ralph Bakshi, the innovative creator of such uniquely animated films as Heavy Traffic, Lord of the Rings, and American Pop, inspired by the art of Frazetta, worked together with the artist to successfully capture the passion, vitality, and adventurous worlds that Frazetta created for the exciting new feature motion picture, Fire and Ice.
But like I said, we'll talk about Frank Frazetta in a second. So Bakshi uses rotoscoping again while attempting to replicate Frank Frazetta's artwork. Also, really Make sure to Google image search Fire and Ice behind the scenes, and you'll see a few of the color photos of the live action that were used by the animators for rotoscoping.
In this wonderful, flexible world, tree limbs on a small soundstage become tree limbs hanging over huge canyons.
It's not the voice actors, but it's interesting to see the actors wearing the exact costumes their characters wear in the animated final product. Plus, the pictures are in color, but the photos that they used, that the animators used, were printed in black and white because, well, it was cheaper. And before you get your hopes up, the actress who played Princess Tigra for the live action references is not as outlandishly curvy as her animated counterparts. Actress Cynthia Leek, who was in Dukes of Hazzard, Dynasty, Dallas, Chips, Buck Rogers in the 25th century. She performed as Tigra during the live action shoot, and you'll see in the behind the scenes photos, she is quite attractive, but the animators took a lot of creative license. However, Randy Norton, who performed the role of Larn during the live action shoot, actually looks like his animated character counterpart. Peter Chung worked on the film and went on to work on MTV's Liquid Television, and he actually created Aeon Flux. Thomas Kincaid painted backgrounds on the film, and his work is very popular. It's estimated that 1 in every 20 American homes owns a copy of his paintings, so they're very colorful, well-lit, tranquil scenes. Stephen E. Gordon was a layout artist on Fire and Ice, and he was one of the directors of the first Marvel Lionsgate direct-to-video Ultimate Avengers. He also worked on Stan Lee's The Condor, the X-Men Evolution series, Swan Princess, Anastasia, and Titan AE. Let's get back to Frank Frazetta, the legendary fantasy and science fiction artist who worked on comic books, paperback book covers, paintings, posters, album covers, including 3 very classic covers for the band Molly Hatchet. Lots of work for Warren Publishing that included creepy, eerie, and Vampirella covers. I'm the proud owner of an original Tarzan paperback that sports a Frazetta cover. It's amazing. He also created covers for another Edgar Rice Burroughs creation, John Carter of Mars. And if you've never seen the 2003 documentary Painting with Fire, you need to.
You had a full-blown, classical, wonderfully drawing illustrator seemed to come out of nowhere.
All of a sudden, millions of copies of a paperback book sell for the first time in history.
But Frazetta's his gut-level sexuality.
He showed us nightmares and horrors that we never, ever imagined as kids.
Before he passed away in 2010, a series of strokes impaired Frazetta's manual dexterity to a degree that he actually switched to drawing and painting with his left hand. Amazing. Brooklyn-born badass, all-time artist, legend, Frank Frazetta.
Frank Frazetta is probably the most influential artist of the last half a century.
So Fire and Ice was written by Jerry Conway, co-creator of The Punisher, and scripted the death of the character of Gwen Stacy during his long run on Amazing Spider-Man. He created Firestorm for DC, wrote the first major modern-day intercompany crossover, Superman vs. Amazing Spider-Man, in 1973 with a really awesome cover by Carmen Infantino. Another contributor for the writing chores on Fire and Ice was Roy Thomas. He was actually Stan Lee's first successor as editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, and he's best known for introducing the pulp magazine hero Conan the Barbarian to American comics. So this was back for Marvel in 1970, illustrated by Barry Windsor Smith. So Roy Thomas also wrote for Marvel's X-Men and Avengers and DC Comics All-Star Squadron. Again, the popularity of Conan in comics was very much inspired by the sword and sandal trend I mentioned before, and he had hit comics like Michael Morlock's Elric, Mike Grell's The Warlord, and I'm sure the sword and sandal trend inspired Dave Sims in Cerebus. Just a quick reminder, remember you can find the Fan to Fan podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan to Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN, or on Twitter at Fan to Fan Podcast. I'd love to hear from you, so reach out, send the message, and let me know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
Fire and Ice voice actors. Actor William Ostrander lent the voice to Larn.
Larn, last of a mighty warrior tribe.
Maggie Roswell did the voice of Tigra, who's actually the voice of Maude Flanders in The Simpsons.
Necron, you're a great power in the world. You have all that any man ever wants or needed, and yet you despair. For there is one thing you lack, one gift that only you can bestow between our people, peace.
Stephen Mandel did the voice of Necron, which was also a name that was previously used by Batchke in the movie Wizards.
Woman, I spit on peace. I spit on you. Next time you present me with one of your little sluts, mother dear, I'll squash you like a bug.
And Susan Tyrrell did the voice of Queen Juliana in Fire and Ice.
This is your bride, my son. She will be mother to your sons.
And she actually was the narrator in the movie Wizards. Steve Sandor did the voice of Darkwolf, and he actually appeared as an actor in Star Trek, Gunsmoke, Ironside, The Streets of San Francisco, Starsky and Hutch, Chips, Charlie's Angels, Three's Company, A-Team, Knight Rider, a lot of late 70s and 80s TV classics.
Get out of here. No. The hell you won't. Go find the girl.
So Fire and Ice is released August 26 of 1983. It's rated PG. It's 81 minutes long. It has a budget of $1.2 million and makes a box office of $760,000. Andrew Leal, who was a reviewer for the Chicago Review Press, wrote at the time, "The plot is standard, recalling nothing so much more as a graphic episode of Filmation's He-Man series, and Fire and Ice essentially stands as a footnote to the spat of barbarian films that followed in the wake of Arnold Schwarzenegger's appearance as Conan." So a bit of a review. It's got a fairly simple plot, and it really all starts with Frank Frazzetta's amazing sketches. So from the stronghold in Ice Peak, you have the evil Queen Juliana and her son, Necron, and they send forth this wave of glaciers, that's the ice in the title, and that's forcing humanity to retreat south towards the equator by the volcanoes. So that's the fire. Necron sends a delegation to King Jarrah in Firekeep that's going to request the surrender of the king. But this is a ruse that's orchestrated by the queen for Necron subhumans to actually kidnap the king's barefoot daughter, Princess Tigra. Queen Juliana feels that Necron should take a bride to produce an heir. But Tigra, king's daughter, makes an escape and comes upon Larn, a young warrior, and he's the only survivor of a village who offers to escort the princess back to Firekeep. As Tigra is recaptured by the subhumans, Larn teams up with the mysterious Darkwolf to save Tigra and then travel to Ice Peak to stop Juliana. Darkwolf faces Necron and kills him as Ice Peak succumbs to lava that's released by King Jarrah and then is finally destroyed. So the film finishes with Larn about to kill a beaten subhuman, but Tigra stops him and says it's over and embraces him. Darkwolf is seen atop a cliff. He watches them, smiles, and then disappears. Tigra and Larn kiss, and the credits roll. So it feels like a really lightly plotted fantasy pulp novel that comes to life. I don't want to insult good fantasy novels because I've gotten lost in some really good fantasy novels like, well, the C.S. Lewis Narnia series, John Carter of Mars, the Barham series, R.A. Salvatore's Dark Elf series, Brian Jack's Redwall series. If you haven't checked out those are great, just like the Earthsea books. And of course, there's the Lord of the Rings series. But Fire and Ice feels like the shell to one of those more inspired, well-developed fantasy epics, but without enough of the history to make it as interesting as it can be. Even a relatively new dungeon master goes a bit further into the mythology of adventure, so I don't even want to call Fire and Ice a bad D&D inspired story, but it's not very well developed. There's some cliche and very uninspired dialogue, and watching it, I wonder if it would have been better to keep it as a dialogueless film, keep it as a silent film, and really ramp up the score and sound design. So that might have been too stylized, but I think that would have been an interesting creative choice. And then there's the princess's sexuality, something that Batchke was experienced with in creating adult-oriented animation, but obviously something that was very welcomed by me when I first saw it as a prepubescent teenager.
How can you talk about elements when the war draws near to us every hour?
Princess Tigra, we all have our duty. Your father's duty is to be king and lead. Your brother's duty is to soldier. And your duty is to learn.
You mean my duty is to stay shut up while all the men do the fighting and share all the glory. Well, we think that stinks. Don't we, Shaitan?
It really cues into the young and older male fantasies that Frazetta and other painters like Boris Vallejo really masterfully produced in their paintings. So the helpless maiden in robes, clothes is barely hanging on to these very voluptuous women, has a European sensibility, like what you saw in 1981's Heavy Metal movie, that last scene with Tarna, the really strong, beautiful warrior maiden who fights the barbarian leader, that really feels very Mobius inspired. That, pretty much. Some very good designs in Fire and Ice. The hero has that young hero look, the villain looks like a villain, and there's a really solid attempt at translating Frazetta's epic designs to film and trying to bring the awesomeness of his paperback covers to life. It's not a nice world. It's dark and it's survival of the fittest with wolves, underwater monsters, and a harsh landscape. We see all the fantasy tropes like the strong hero, the helpless, and mostly naked princess. To be fair, Lauren is just about as naked throughout the whole film. We get dragon hawks. Princess Tigra even has a pet saber-toothed tiger, which is always cool. Dark Wolf, who's this wannabe medieval Batman, has this amazing scene on top of the horse on a hill, very much looking like Frazetta's well-known Death Dealer painting. In the original screenplay for Fire and Ice, Necron, the villain, was supposed to actually be Dark Wolf's father. So kind of interesting. Dark Wolf has some powers, and so does Necron. So that might have explained some of that and might have made things a bit more interesting in the movie. Queen Juliana is wasted. You never really see her be truly evil beyond one scene, and she's not really in it for very long. Animation is amazing. Rotoscoping was a great choice and makes everything feel somewhere between animation and live action. Overall, the movie has a lot of action, a lot of fighting, but it's not very gory. The music is composed by William Kraft. Sounds really similar at times to the Lord of the Rings score, which he also produced. Just to note, in 2010, Robert Rodriguez announced that he was actually going to direct a live-action remake of the film. Batchke stated that he did not want any involvement with the film, but he agreed to license the rights to Rodriguez. The deal closed shortly after Frazetta's death. And on December 18th of 2014, Sony Pictures acquired the filming rights to the live-action remake version of Fire and Ice that would supposedly be directed by Robert Rodriguez. He said he wanted to make the film look exactly like Frazetta's paintings, and with his experience in effects-heavy, stylized films like Sin City 1 and 2 and the Spy Kids series, I'm sure he could do it, especially since he seems to have a great respect for Frazetta's work and its legacy in the entire barbarian medieval fantasy category. And if you actually search online, you'll find some concept art featuring Dark Wolf fighting off a horde of subhumans in true Frank Frazetta fashion. So if that was Robert Rodriguez's proof of concept, I would love to see it come to life.
This unique and elaborate process you have been watching has resulted in one of the most exciting animated feature films ever made, Fire and Ice. It's about demons and sorcerers, beautiful women, subhumans, young barbarians. It's the special world of Ralph Bakshi and Frank Frazetta.
Fire and Ice, it's a product of its time. Doesn't really transcend, but I think that's why it's also easily forgotten, especially to generations that didn't grow up watching the movie or the movies that inspired it. But it should not be forgotten. If you have an opportunity and you have not seen Fire and Ice, I would highly recommend it. You'll find it on iTunes. You'll find it on Google Play. You'll even probably find it on YouTube. It's also available on DVD and Blu-ray, and there's a 2-disc special edition on Blu-ray that includes the Painting with Fire documentary all about Frank Frazetta. Absolutely worth hunting down on Amazon or eBay. That's it for this episode. Tune in next time for more fan-to-fan conversations on the Fan-to-Fan podcast. Thanks for listening.
Her brain kept alive by experimental science, by a man whose abnormal passions inspired him to try the impossible.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.